downstairs. Need help.
What is it, jabber.ietf.org?
Yeah.
There's no password. No, service unavailable. Come on. It's Homenet at what?
No, I think it would be great. We've been discussing that. Kind of like, I don't it's already in good school. All right. Like, why do we go past it?
Jabber.ietf.org. Sure. What?
Because we keep arguing about that.
What is it supposed to be?
Can
Where?
Apple Messenger join the IETF Jabber room?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Then yes. I don't care.
I don't even know.
Well, I do, but not that much.
Well, not so,
Like nobody other people's names or your own name?
I would be fine with
That does kind of suck. So I'm downloading
We can
Adium,
work with it on sure that when the board
and then it's join group chat,
gets a little further
Oh, okay.
out so that it doesn't.
Oh,
Homenet,
Isaac gave it to the
jabber.ietf.org,
And I did too.
and it just didn't go anywhere there. It got actually stuck in the
join,
I don't remember them.
service unavailable.
Well,
And I pay a lot of attention to the GNSO.
exactly, and I gave it to you. That was 3 years ago. You were actually on the GNSO conference.
That's annoying.
And they have it, yeah.
Yeah,
But I
talked
didn't
to
hear
you.
about it.
I talked to you about it. I talked to
You didn't talk to
Jonathan,
me about it.
and at least I talked to Jonathan about it. I am like, I brought it up a couple of times to Jonathan.
Really?
Yeah,
Because you never brought it up as a council.
yeah. And
And I
said,
know I brought it up as a council.
Yeah.
Because I heard, because I call it the IETF. Never, Jonathan never said, oh yeah, there was an official.
Yeah, but I attended the official
Thank you.
because it was actually, I think it was officially to the board and you.
Okay, so I was asking for something that's already being done.
But it doesn't
wasn't
matter.
done.
But it doesn't matter. We can do it again.
We should always do it.
Yes.
Whenever there's one.
I'm not sure about it. I'd like to come to the set of rules such as.
Hello, we'd like to get underway momentarily. So if you could take your seats, please.
That's a wide.
Yeah, no, that's all.
And I have to say, it was my fault that I didn't
How do you do it with
follow it
iMessage?
up. But
Just
it's
join chat room.
it went into
Assuming you've got a Jabber. Go file, go to chat room.
File?
Oh no, edit.
That's it. On iMessage? Nope.
Probably won't work now.
Okay, thanks.
I'll disable. So I've disabled.
Okay. Fine.
You might want to make before one.
Oh, well,
We haven't got time now.
I just want to join the Jabber room, the main Jabber room. Gmail is Jabbery, I
I
think.
know they turned it off, they discontinued it.
Oh,
So Google turned it off. So do you have a Jabber account?
probably.
If
Maybe
you know the
Cisco's is
username-
Jabber.
If you know the username and password, you put it in there, but I agree.
If yeah, we don't have time. We'll have to get by.
But at least you know how to do it now.
Thank you.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
If you manage to get authenticated.
Oh, maybe.
Sort of 4 after now.
You're not alone.
That's not going to work. It won't work.
I have one more thing to try.
Okay, good afternoon. This is the Homenet Working Group session at IETF 97. Your chairs here, I'm Ray Bellis, and to my left is Mark Townsley. We have here the standard IETF note well. If you're unable to comply with the terms of the note well, please vacate the premises. So we have a relatively short agenda today, having still fortunately haven't got the routing walls behind us. So we just have naming walls instead. A little bit of administrivia. The blue sheets are already circulating. Please make sure you fill them out so we know who's here. Thank you to Mikhail Abramson, who's volunteered as the Jabber relay. I think we are still lacking a note taker, unfortunately. So we're still missing a note taker, unfortunately. So would anybody care to volunteer to take notes for us, please? Thank you, Stuart. Okay. So we'll do a status update in a moment just on some other working group drafts, brief agenda bash. So ultimately there isn't very much on the agenda today. We've got the update on RSD 7788 and its unfortunate misappropriation of the .home special use domain name. So we have Pierre talking to that initially, and Pierre's also been had benefited from some help from Ted Lemon on writing up the 6761 process document application for that. So he'll be working on that. And although we've not had an update on the naming architecture document from Ted, we're going to do a bit of a presentation on that. So we'll basically talk about the next steps. We make sure we actually get some progress and make sure it's, we know what we're going to do as a working group with that. So by way of the working group update, so we've got the 2 new drafts that I just mentioned in the previous slide. We've effectively, because of the need to make very rapid progress on this and absent any other contributions, and because this has to be there, by sort of chair or mandate and fiat, we've basically taken these straight in as working group documents. You do, of course, get a say on these documents, but our hope is that so long as we don't get any really major spanner in the work today, that we'll actually go straight to a working group last call on these documents to make sure we get as substantive comment as soon as possible immediately after this meeting. As I mentioned before, the naming architecture hasn't actually had any updates, and there's another document on this list which is missing, which is possibly should be on the on-hold pending other docs, which is the Homenet Babel profile. But at the moment, in Julius's absence, I understand that's effectively on hold whilst the Babel working group themselves decide what they're doing with Babel. So it doesn't really seem much point in actually fully writing up a profile of a protocol that may end up changing. The hybrid proxy zeroconf is still on hold pending work in the DNSSD working group. That's then also related to work that Stuart and I do in the DNSOP working group. And the front-end naming architecture, front-end naming delegation and the naming architecture DHC options are still on hold pending sort of affirmation that they fit within the naming architecture that Ted is working on. So any questions, please come to the front mic, which is the only one that's in here working at the moment. We've done that deliberately so that Michael can actually tell who's talking. When you do come to the microphone, please make sure you announce your name and affiliation. So any further questions before we proceed? No? Okay, I think without further ado then, Pierre, please. And yes, please stand in the pink square.
Just a question. This is Dave Thaler. Why do we need to announce affiliation here? I'm saying that's maybe okay, but it's very unusual for an IETF meeting to say, please announce your affiliation. So just wondering what if
sure.
that's actually
I thought that was the normal practice.
What's that?
Just name. I agree with you.
Okay. So it's just name. So I propose just name. By the way, I'm Dave Thaler from Microsoft, if you need me to say that.
Okay.
But I'm Dave Thaler from IETF, so.
Okay.
Yes. Well,
Hello, everybody.
Affiliations are optional.
indeed, affiliations are optional. But,
So we are going to talk about the .homenet TLD reservation as a special use domain name. This is an update on, the presentation on the 2 documents that have been published since last IETF. So this is the plan as proposed by the chairs. There is one document that is called Homenet-redact. That document is very short. It just removes, clarifies and updates 7788 on the fact that .home should not, shall not be used as the default TLD. It does not replace it by anything. It just say that .home was there by mistake. It must not be used as the default TLD in RC 7788. And then there is this second document, which is a bit longer and technically more interesting, which replaces .home from the HNCP RFC with .homenet. It also reserves .homenet as using the RFC 6761, the special use domain name, because .homenet being reserved for use in home network has some particularities that I'm going to talk about. So the idea being that those two documents are going to be processed together and published together as RFCs. I think as soon as possible. So just a quick reminder, in case some people still wonder, why do we need default TLD already? So those are the key points, the key reason why. First, it needs to work when we don't have a connectivity to the internet. That's part of the Homenet architecture. The Homenet network must work in case you do not have any ISP or in case you lost the connectivity. So you cannot rely on your ISP from assigning you any name, any configured name. It must work in the absence of configuration because the user is not going to bother with, most users are not going to configure their own name, but service discovery, naming the home network still needs to work. So we need a default, basically. We need implementers like me implementing Homenet, the protocol HNCP. We need to say what is the default value, and we need to say that in the document, in some document. We can't let users decide, because if they decide, implementers decide, because if they decide, they will use things like .home. That's what we did. That was apparently a bad idea. And it must be user-friendly, because we all are trying at IETF to avoid users from seeing those names. We would like them to not see them, like in MDNS, we try very hard to not see them. But still, users end up seeing some names and sometimes have to remember some names. Therefore, we need a default value. I hope everybody agrees on that, at least. So, yeah, please.
Dave Taylor. All of those are reasons why you need a default value. None of those are reasons why you need a TLD.
I would say the user-friendly arguments require a TLD.
Completely disagree. Just to give you an example, not that it's the one I would propose, but .homenet is no more user-friendly than .home.net. They're equally user-friendly. Okay. Again, I'm not proposing we put it under .net, but my point is none of these are reasons to actually use a TLD. Right. These are all reasons to have a well-known value. Absolutely, 100% agree with all those 4 bullets, but that just doesn't answer the question.
So I disagree. First, .home.net is not as user-friendly as .homenet, I think.
Yeah,
It looks like
it can't be
website to me.
It can't be
Actually,
.home.
Probably.
It can't be .home.net. It has to be a TLD, or it has to be under .arpa. So we don't control .net.
Great. Now you're actually going towards what I would my preferred solution. But my point is that none of these actually make that argument, right? .home.arpa, right? So we, rather than talking about what color the bike shed should be, in other words, what's the actual letters in it, we should talk about whose property is the bike shed going to be built on. Is it going to be built on IETF's property or ICANN's property or .net's property or whatever? And once you've solved that, then we can talk about what color the bike shed should be.
So Ted Lemon. We tried to get local.arpa 10 years ago. I think Stuart describes this in some detail in RFC 6761 or 6762, and we were not able to get it. That was rejected at the time. It doesn't seem to me that there is any choice that we could make here that will not create somebody pushing back and saying, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. And I think that's a tremendous waste of time. This is an obvious solution. It will work. As far as I know, ICANN doesn't object to doing things like this. And I would really hate to have this turn into another rat hole. So it's possible that these aren't the right words to say here. But if you think that .home.arpa makes more sense than .homenet, Nah, it's a judgment call. It doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds kind of weird to me, but okay. But, you know, why do we have to spend like another month talking about this?
Yeah.
Silly.
Stop there. So Michael Abrahamson here. So what are the odds that we're going to get this rejected? Is there any risk that whoever handles this, that this will be rejected and this is not going to complete and we're going to get Homenet?
So based on what Stuart told me just before the meeting, apparently there has been no application on .homenet at all, not a single one, and it's not on any list of dangerous TLDs.
Okay, so I would have expected this to be vetted, you know, a bit, and had everybody said, okay, I have no problem with this, that might interfere with this, but so this has not.
That's what I thought until
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we hope
I mean,
to.
we followed the ruls, and we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, from the chair here, so there are three options. It's register a special use domain that is a top level domain, which is the current proposal here. It is register a special use domain name under a domain which is under IETF/IB control. And as far as I know, the only one of those is .arpa. My personal position is that .home.arpa would not be appropriate. I don't think we should be seeing home users seeing domain names that have effectively, what was Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency appearing. Yeah.
Oh,
The
that's
third is that it gets routed under a domain name which is under the control and would need to be continually registered of a commercial domain name operator. And I'm not personally aware of any other options, although possibly Suzanne has some thoughts. But to me, I think the first seems the easiest and the most palatable.
This is Andrew Sullivan. Actually, there is a fourth option, of course, and that is that we could create a special use domain name under some other name in the tree, because actually 6761 doesn't prevent that. That it would be a fabulous bad idea is quite a different thing. And I think that that is the distinction that that Dave was trying to make. This slide says that we need a TLD, and it doesn't give any reasons for it. What it gives is reasons that you need a domain, and then we're going to have an argument, I guess, over whether it's more user-friendly or not. And I'm not entirely sure that we've got the expertise in this room to talk about user interface considerations. So I personally, I just want to say I don't care whether this is .homenet or something under ARPA. What I can say is that ARPA is no doubt under the control of the IAB, and so if you request something under .arpa, you have to negotiate with 13 people. If you request something under, if you request a new TLD under the special use 6761 rules, then you have to negotiate with IETF last calls. You have to negotiate with 1,200 of your closest friends. Up to you what you do, but that is the distinction.
Thank you, Andrew.
Suzanne Wolf. In support of what Andrew just said, I'll also point out that if what you're really after is to retain uniqueness of the name and to avoid a collision, which is a practical goal that I thought was part of the picture here, something under .arpa is committed to be reserved if the IAB says so, and you're not dependent on anybody external to the IETF or external to IETF oversight to get the name reserved that you want.
Peter Gordinik. I'm thrilled by the observation that home.net is not under the IETF's control. The same holds for the root. So if we can't take it away from somebody else, we can't take it away from somebody else, and we should take it from ourselves. And that's the ARPA domain or anything else that the IETF is responsible for, including IETF.org or something. But of course, ARPA is available for these purposes. RFC 3172, I guess, is the one defining the registration policy, and that's the way that should be chosen. If you're considered about timing, you may want to include considerations how long it might take to work along appeals that may appear in case that the IETF is squatting certain top-level domain strings, and that can take a long time. Thank you.
Peter, are you proposing that you're going to do an appeal if the IETF gained consensus to do this? that what you're saying?
I thought there's a likelihood that there might be an appeal.
Do you know of somebody who would do that?
I don't know of somebody who would do that.
So you personally don't intend to do that?
That is not what I said. It's just that I don't know of anybody who would do this. I may or may not do this, but that.
If you intend to do it, then you know that you intend to do it. So why not?
But if I don't know if I intend to do it, then I don't know if I intend to do
then
it.
why are you saying something about it at the microphone?
Because I said there is a certain likelihood.
Jesus.
After Ted, we've got Ralph on the Meet Echo.
Yeah. So, wow. My mind is blank for some reason. Yeah. So. Yeah. I'm not sure. You follow your muse. Yeah. So from my perspective, I guess my first question is: are we aware of any difficulty that occurred other than the utterly stupid discussion that occurred on the IETF mailing list about .onion? Was there any difficulty getting ICANN to? Did ICANN object to us using .onion? Does anybody know the answer to that question? So the answer is yes.
Someone need echo?
Sorry to make you. Sorry to interrupt the queue here, but this is Andrew Sullivan again. The answer to that question is A, strictly irrelevant, and B, a long, boring conversation that involves subtlety that we don't want to have because, I don't live in Cambridge or have a great beard.
Okay. I'm going to let Ralph jump in here from Meet Echo. Ralph, go ahead.
Okay. There we go. So I had sort of two comments. One, Andrew and Suzanne sort of already touched on, which is to make sure everybody's fully aware of the RFC 6761 process, which is to publish a standard track RFC, like the one that we're discussing here. The process is not that there is a single individual someplace or a small body that decides yay or nay, this is good or this is bad. It goes through the IETF process, and if it's published, that's ideally, or that's the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to go through an IETF process, publish an RFC. Once the RFC is published, it gets added to the registry, and we're done. I wonder if if you all would take a friendly suggestion that we skip whether this is a TLD or not. We skip what the characters are that go in this right-hand label or set of labels, and we say, we come up with a name for what it is we're going to put in there, and we just call it that until we get to the end of the rest of the discussion, and then we can go back and figure out what goes in there. Would that be doable? Thanks. Done.
It's sort of kicking the can down the road, though, right?
No, it's not. We're kicking the can down the road now. We're wasting all this time on which string it is before we talk about how it actually works. Let's figure out how it works first and then pick the damn string.
Well, that's sort of in 7788, right? And
sort of.
It's in RFC 7788, which has already been published, which we've already had, I don't know how many bits and bytes and 3 years of running code and 2 implementations and yada, 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 yada. That's already been done. It was just done with .home. And now we're talking about changing that to .homenet because .home was not palatable. And in fact, that use of .home already went through the entire IETF process.
I don't
think we need to rehash that.
Had I noticed that process early enough, I would have appealed it because I don't think it got sufficient review in the IETF to make that decision about .home. That's all water over the bridge. But this time around, we need to go make sure we do the process correctly.
Yeah, well,
that's what we're trying to do. That's why we got 6761 up there, and it includes the name to change it to. Otherwise, the implementer doesn't know what to do, and we'll keep using .home basically.
That's Mark. I'm not saying never pick the string. I'm saying for the time being, let's not spend whatever we spent 20 minutes talking about the string and get the rest of the issues dealt with first.
So I've got 3 people queued up at the mic. How many of you want to say something about the string and what the name is, whether it's a TLD or not? Okay, all 3 of them want to do that. So, I mean, to change this, I have to
That
tell
was
them
a
to sit
friendly
down.
suggestion. Far be it from me to go in the face of consensus.
We do not, from the chair, intend to let this rat hole on and on. I mean, we've got a fair amount of time in today's session.
Yep.
I would rather we understand the issues now and get a decision that's palatable than end up having the second document that Ted and Pierre have been working on have to drag on for months and months and months, and at the same time holding up the publication of the redaction document. We can get this out of the way, get some rough consensus that this is the way to go, and that hopefully that's it, done and dusted. So,
yeah, we've been told to move very fast by our ADs, so let's just try to get it all done.
Okay, thank you, Ralph.
All right. Hey, Jason Livingood. My couple comments here. One would be, if the goal is user friendliness, I think that should be the goal, not expedient. So if .arpa is more expedient, but it's not really the right answer, I think you're kind of choosing the wrong thing. I would choose the thing that is user friendly. I am not sure that whatever string .arpa is something that is understandable to an average user. I think they're going to say, what the F is .arpa and huh? So I would say don't have extra dots in the string if you don't need to. And something super simple, .homenet or .home or whatever, seems like a simpler way to go. If user friendliness is a goal, and it should be.
If you put something to a user that it reminds me of back in the 90s, the America Online client popped up a message that said L2TP error, and I received myself a ton of emails from AOL users saying, "What are you doing to my computer?" Right? The users will type in ARPA and try to figure out what the heck that is, and they'll see it's an advanced research projects agency by the US government. I mean, oh my God, under the control of the Internet Engineering Task Force. Oh no, and we're gonna get a shitload of emails on IETF.ietf.org about it, right? I don't know if this is, it's a good thing to do.
Sim Chan, but
Okay, so
we
what
know
is
that we
downside?
control that, and it's not going to be a problem. The other thing is, you say home or HomeNet, it's easy for the user. I mean, that's assuming you're like me, Western English speaking. We're not all like.
Oh yeah, we could do maison and casa, and
There is a UTF-8 symbol for a house. .arpa. There you go.
But you
That
can't
looks
type
fine.
a UTF-8 symbol on most keyboards. .casa is
then we have to
already
use
actually-
emojis and.
Okay.
Can I be next? Can I
Yeah,
be
that's
next?
Pierre as the
Just-
presenter. That's him.
Yeah, I couldn't put myself in the queue, so. Just for the record, I also think that whatever .arpa is not applicable, because I don't want the users to see these names, really. And really, the thing is, IETF, I don't know, whoever, IETF has agreed to move fast on this. I don't want to hear people saying, oh, maybe .homenet will not work, maybe we cannot do it, or we should be careful, or we should do .arpa because I'm not sure we can do it, maybe someone will appeal. This is going to be fast. So in a few, I don't know, weeks, maybe months, we are going to know if IETF appeals or not. If they appeal, at least we will have a document, as Ralph said, with all the technical terms will be done, agreed, and IETF is just going to tell us, you can't use .homenet, pick something else, or I don't know, they will pick for us. But at least right now we have to agree on what we want, not what we fear we cannot have, or what we fear we think we are going to have.
Yep.
Thank you, Pierre.
Yeah, Ted Lemon. So yeah, 100% agree with that. Also, so the special use domains name registry is fundamentally an IANA registry. It has a registry policy. The registry policy is not that anybody in the IETF can object to a name because they don't like it, right? If you want to object to a name, you have to have a technical reason why that name is the wrong name to choose. And if you do have a technical reason why that name is the wrong name to choose, then we either have to address that or we have to use a different name. But if you don't have a technical reason why that's the wrong name to use, then there's nothing to appeal. There's no basis for an appeal, and there's no basis for saying that there isn't consensus to use that name, because basically a bunch of people want to use the name, and the only people who object don't have any good reason why they're objecting. So, you know, the argument can be made that that registry shouldn't exist, but that registry does exist. We have an IETF process for using that registry. The ISG could certainly say, well, we as the people who are actually responsible for approving the allocation refuse to approve it, and that's a legitimate thing they could do. But there isn't really any basis for the IETF, for 1,000 people in the IETF saying no to it.
And I'm sure that the ISG has been discussing this extensively already, and they are expecting to see a special use domain name application that will have effectively a top-level domain in it. This is not going to surprise the ISG when it arrives.
Hi,
Avery.
my name's Avery Doria. My name's Avery Doria. I don't normally have an affiliation, but in this case, I should mention that I am the co-chair of the ICANN New GTLD group, and probably, although I can't speak for them, of course. So first of all, I want to say that this is a good time to do it, because it's going to be at least another year before the floodgates open again with people applying for things. Within the policies that we adhere to, if something is on that reserved name list, then the policy says we can't touch it. So that makes it a safe thing to do. And the fact that it's a neologism, that it's a new word, not a word that is already in use or a word that's in dictionaries, makes it, well, I won't. Yeah, it became a word, but anyway, it makes it less likely that anyone would squawk about it at all. Now, I've asked that there be a communication between the two organizations when this happens, just to make sure. But it's a relatively safe name. It's a relatively safe time, and so I figured I would just mention that.
Thank you,
because
Avery.
within a year or two, when the gates open,
Absolutely.
it gets less safe.
Thank you, Avery. That's very useful.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, the other minor point, not the reason I got up at the mic, I'll get to that one as my second comment, but as a freebie, I would ask, since the goal is we would like users to not see them, it's, is it going to be, do you envision it as being much different from the reverse tree right now, IENETR.ARPA, which all your home networks and stuff use, but the goal is the users never see that, right? And so maybe that's not, maybe .ARPA is not a big deal because it's not a big deal for the reverse tree, but that's not why I got up at the mic. I just want you to think about that. I got up the mic to say thank you to Mark and Ray. I agreed with your characterization here that there's already an RFC. The reason I got up on the mic to begin with was, if we go back to the on consensus and humming document that I like to cite, right? Consensus is achieved when all issues have been addressed, though not necessarily accommodated, right? And there is an issue here about whether it should be a TLD or not that has been raised at multiple IETF meetings, and I've never seen it called as a consensus on it. And that's why I raised this here, because I think it needs to be an explicit decision as to whether it's a TLD or not a TLD, rather than just kind of as an implied thing. So I got up here to say, thank you for allowing this discussion, because this is exactly the discussion I wanted us to have in this meeting, and I'd like us to make a decision in this meeting and confirm it on the list rather than waiting for that, regardless of which decision that we make, right? So that's why I got up at the mic the first time, and so thank you for helping to drive this.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
Hi, Bob Hinden. I agree with what the previous two people said, and I think it's fine. I like having a TLD for this and think .homenet is just fine. We should just do it. We have a way of doing it. So just don't take forever.
Thank you, Bob.
Stuart Cheshire. My opinion on this is we should have one document instead of two. It should be a very short document that says, don't use .home, use .homenet. And that tells vendors what to do. Currently, if you buy a BT Voyager home gateway, it's using .home. It will carry on doing that until we publish a document saying to do something else. And it'll probably still carry on doing .home anyway, so we'll have polluted two top-level names instead of one. But if that's the decision, let's just do it and publish it. Let Peter file his appeal. We'll work through the whole process, however many years that takes. But we need to start the process, because the sooner the appeal's filed, the sooner we can deal with it.
Yeah. We're well aware that this could be done with one document. The fact that it's two documents is essentially to get the
well, you realize if it's two documents, the second one will never be published.
Well,
so it will only be one document. It's just a question of what's in that document.
The second document is normatively referenced from the redact documents. So, and
well,
they,
yeah, go ahead.
And they are currently have agreement with our AD and the ISG that those two documents will be bundled. But the
If they're bundled, they don't need to be two documents. The only reason they're two documents is because they will not be bundled. One will die. That's why they're two documents.
I'd like to invite Terry to speak on that because we're under the impression that Terry has promised
Terry Manderson, AD.
bundle these.
Okay, let's kind of stick, if we can, to the questions that Dave Taylor raised. I think they're valid. In terms of the number of documents, we can cross that bridge when we come to it. I don't think it's that critical. I want two documents at this point in time. One had to be created for an expediency in terms of communicating to other organizations about us accidentally jumping on top of .home when we shouldn't have. That needed to exist. That has to happen.
Yeah, and the second document is then to fix it and make sure the protocol is deployable. Okay, Frank.
Now,
I think we should let.
well, I would like to hear Terry tell the group what he told us, that the two documents will be advanced together.
I think Terry just affirmed that.
Well,
basically, yes. I want to see these go forward as quickly as possible. Is that
They're
unreasonable?
Clustered.
Is that unreasonable?
It's
I
not
don't think so.
Okay. Yeah.
Ralph is in queue.
Oh, okay. Is he? All right. Okay, Ralph, go ahead.
Hey, I'm back. This is Ralph Drones again. Let's see, we had sort of an offline discussion in the chat room, and I want to make sure that everybody in the room is on the same page because, well, I think the discussion has a little bit of an impact here. The discussion in the chat room is basically the observation that the selection of that right-hand string, whatever it looks like, is independent of the naming mechanism that it refers to. So the idea here is we can identify the name string quickly and then go back and fill in the resolution mechanism later. I gently disagree with Mark that RFC 7788 actually defines the name mechanism. It defines how that magic string is carried around, but I don't think it defines the name mechanism itself. The one sticky wicket here in trying to move forward based on that modularity, the orthogonality between the string and the naming mechanism, is that some parts of the special use domain name considerations from RFC 6761 do depend on the behavior of the various DNS components, the various name resolution components, for the specific name resolution mechanism that's involved. If it's possible to write the special use domain name considerations in such a way that it's independent of it's sort of a functional description, a behavioral description, rather than a complete explanation of the naming mechanism, then it may well be possible to write those special use domain name considerations independent of the actual name mechanism that's
Ralph, if I can interject
background.
there, Ralph.
Finally, I'll observe that TED's Homenet naming architecture is just getting underway, and it's unless we agree on this orthogonality and we write the .homenet document to be in an orthogonal way, it seems strange to do that document now while this naming architecture document is just getting started in the working group. So there you go. I think it's important that we believe that there's the orthogonality and we can get the name independent of the background naming mechanism.
Okay, so Ralph, if I can reply to that one. So the intention of the second document, the joint document between Pierre and Ted, is to provide that. It clarifies, or hopefully clarifies, and please send suggestions if you don't think it does, that this name is for standard DNS resolution, that it is a normal DNS domain name. It's moderately independent of HNCP in that regard, and also with respect to the whole naming architecture, in so much as we expect that the naming architecture will ultimately have an internal unicast DNS component.
And regardless of the state of the naming architecture document, or any BIS of 7788. 7788 has already been the document for code that has been written that currently selects a default. Actually, 7788's purpose was to, define, how to configure the network and specify the defaults where needed. And the use of .home was one of many defaults, right? Yeah, Pierre's nodding his head.
Yeah. But
So it was the defaults are specified there, and we could go on, and there could be many other documents that continue to improve the use of HNCP as the base configurator. But still, we have to go define that default because it's already been defined and it's already in the code.
Can I just comment before Ralph comes
Sorry,
back?
1 second, Ralph.
So just as an author to 7788, so the HNCP includes some naming specifications, and we actually implemented it. So it's just a proper standard, but it went through the IETF process of verification, and the document includes how to do service discovery and naming in the home network. So I can agree that there might be need for some clarification, and maybe it's not exactly clear how naming actually works, but we have a working implementation and a specification.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Can I get a clarification on what you mean by a working implementation? You have a working implementation of HNCP, which carries the configuration information around about what the default label is for this special local zone implementation.
Yep, and does naming and does service discovery.
If I'm not mistaken, it carries around a configured one, but if nothing is advertised in the home, all the routers independently decide it's the default if they haven't been told otherwise. They all independently say, okay.
That's not the way I read it, Mark. The way I read it is there has to be something in that string, and the default is .homenet. At least that's the way it's written in 7788, which is a little confusing to me.
I read it last night with Ray, and that's not what we found.
Actually, no, in section 8, I think it is, Ralph, where the TLV is specified, it explicitly says that no TLV is sent if it hasn't, unless it has been specifically administratively configured.
Exactly.
So,
well, then it's an internal conflict, because the other text that I remember from earlier does say that that there has to be some value there. The default to put in is HomeNet. But
the implication is that in the absence of a value, the HNCP participant will assume that the value is .home, but it's not expected to be carried.
Okay, I get the intention. I'm not sure that the text reflects that. When you say that the service discovery, I'm going to pick a little bit of a nit here. That's a personal issue. When you say that the service discovery is defined for for HNCP, I disagree with you, because I posted an errata about the service discovery in HNCP. I don't think it's well defined. It's supposed to use right. I think it's supposed to be using hybrid proxy, as is currently defined in a draft coming out of DNSSD, but it doesn't say anything about how the hybrid proxy stuff gets glued together.
That's
right. Can I just, yeah, I agree on that. There is need for clarification. That's why Ted is working on naming architecture document, which is independent from this presentation. This is out of the scope of this draft, and the high priority task right now is to update 7788 with a different default name. And to do that, we need to register one. And to register one, we need to answer the question in 6761, saying what are the particularities of that name. So that's why the draft, the Homenet.draft, includes some technical specification. But the role of Homenet. As far as I understood, is not to answer all the things that are not completely clear in HNCP. That's the role of the naming architecture draft.
As well as any 7788 BIS that we may create in the future, but we need time.
Yeah, and we don't have time.
And we don't have time.
.home thing.
Yeah, for the .home thing. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thank
I
you.
guess I've sort of lost the thread because I seem to remember hearing a few minutes ago that all of this stuff is baked and it's written into code, and therefore 7788 is complete. And I was trying to address
No,
that
I
point a
also
little
said
bit,
that it's a
but
proposed standard that may
I
need
think
some
we came
clarification.
to the answer to that question.
No piece of work is ever complete, and Bob Hendon is the room
we finished
and
the-
is
we
in the
finished
room
the first
and he understands that. So we may be updating, clarifying, and making better 7788 for ages to come, but we're not going to do that in a .home document. That's what I'm saying.
Fine. Okay, get it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now let's move to technical considerations. Interesting stuff. So these are not quotes from the draft. These are a summary of what's the spirit of the draft, because putting quotes on the slides would be maybe too much text. So basically, I mean, when we file this new TLD, we have to answer a set of questions and explain why the reason why it's a special use domain name. And so this is the spirit of this the special use domain name. So first of all, it must refer to services that are only reachable from the home network, meaning that the services shouldn't be accessible from other home networks. The reason why for that is that the name is not unique, meaning that in different home networks you can have the same name referring to different services. Queries for such names must not leave the administrative boundaries of the home network. So that's for preventing leaks. We don't want these names to leak outside of the home network. That's also one reason why we don't want them to refer to services that are not within the home network. Then the most important point about this particular TLD is that DNS servers and any DNS system must not by default answer queries for such names. That includes DNS servers, not only the roots one. The question is not only to have the root server answering negative answers to .homenet names. It's also to have all the DNS servers answering negative answers for this name, really to prevent leaks, to prevent any queries for that name reaching the root server. And finally, because all the system by default reject those queries, we need to allow those systems being configured such that it's configured being, for instance, by HNCP. HNCP is a protocol which takes care of configuration of other protocols, so which includes configuring the DNS servers such that they answer the queries with names that end with .homenet. That's it for this slide.
Stuart Cheshire, I want to make a quick comment on the first point there. I think that's an unnecessary restriction, and I'm not sure what it adds.
Which one?
The first one, because I may have a bunch of things on my home network that are nameable using .homenet, but if we take that first restriction seriously, the first time I make a NAT mapping in my NAT gateway so that they're accessible from outside the home network, they're not allowed to have a .homenet name. And that to me doesn't make any sense. Some of the services in my home may be only usable within the home because there's a NAT or a firewall preventing incoming connections. There may be other services that are accessible inside the home and outside the home.
Okay.
Yes.
I think this was not the meaning of that sentence. Maybe I need to rephrase it. Yeah, right. I agree with you. I think there is two ways to interpret that sentence.
If you're gonna pinhole a NAT through to them, then you would, I hope, be using a global domain name to reference those services and not your .homenet domain name for them.
It can have two names at once.
No, but I agree. I see no reason why a service in a home network should not have a name with .homenet and another name with something else. I have no issue with that.
Barbara Stark. So I was just going to say that, so 7788, that is the right number, right? Talks nothing about defining something called a home network. It does talk about internal and external interfaces of a router. And so I think what you're really talking about is you don't let things escape out external interfaces. And you don't really know whether or not that's a true boundary of a home network, but it is an external interface.
So the reason why it's written that way is that we didn't wanted the application for .homenet to be specific to HNCP itself. So that's why it's written in vague, sort of vague words. So yeah, in the spirit of HNCP, this should be interpreted as you said. But in the application process for the .homenet, I would tend to say that there is no reason why we should prevent other protocols in the future or other, I don't know. We don't know what may happen. So I don't want to say that TLD must only be used by HNCP. That looks a bit specific.
And maybe if I can clarify, and this possibly also addresses Ralph's point earlier. Expand on what Pierre is saying. The 6761 application, well, HNCP carries the naming. It has certain implications for naming, but ultimately this is an internal unicast DNS domain name, and you could be using this without any HNCP on your network at all. But HNCP requires that there be a name, so that's why there's a link between HNCP and this document. But you could have an internal unicast domain name and not be using HNCP at all.
Yeah, I guess my point was just that there's nothing inside a home network that has any concept of the boundaries of the home network.
Yeah, that's
So there's nothing that can actually enforce this.
But that goes back to our original 5th charter area, which was security, and it's unfortunately somewhere where we've never actually come up with anything practical. That we don't have a fully defined security architecture for HomeNet such that we do know precisely where our edge lies.
Michael Richardson, I understood the first point, and I think this addresses what Stuart was trying to say, to mean that when I look up whatever, Tyson.homenet, that the quad A record that I get back had better not take me to a service that's not at my home. Okay? Not the inverse, right?
Yeah.
And that was the only point. I don't know what it contains. Could be any one of ULAs or link locals or blah blah blahs, but must rivers are only reachable from the HomeNet. So the wording is poor.
Yeah. So
we all agree with that. So, but that was the intent.
So with regard to that, as I said, those are not quotes from the document. So I would invite you, and I will also take a look, check if the document itself is more clear or is just like this sentence, not very clear.
Stuart Cheshire again. I want to respond to what Barbara said because I really didn't understand it. Barbara said, if I understood right, there is no way that we know in today's world to tell where the boundary of the network is. And yet, there are countless millions of home gateways shipped that do exactly this. You have a DHCP client on your computer, and it gets configured with the address of the recursive DNS resolver, which is the home gateway itself, which is, for example, a BT Voyager DSL modem, and it then declares itself to be authoritative for .home. It does not leak any of those queries upstream to the ISP's DNS server or the root name servers. And you say hopefully like there's some.
There's a lot of these.
There are other gateways that don't do this because we don't have an RFC, which is what we're standing here debating. All of the gateways that do this do not leak them by definition because they're answering them, right? It's not like they've got a random number generator in them where they leak them half the time. They answer them 100% of the time. And this is convenient for the user. They type voyager.home in their web browser and they get the configuration page for the DSL modem, and it saves having to type 192.168 or whatever the IPv6 equivalent is. So the users get a benefit, the queries don't leak, it's very obvious where the boundary is, it's the thing that's answering the query, which you were configured by DHCP, and this has existed for 10 years, and we're standing here saying it's not possible and it can't be done. There's a disconnect with reality here.
Okay, Wes, and then we got 2 on Meet Echo after this.
Wes Herdiker. So there's not just one of the things that we've started doing in the IETF lately is also having an operational considerations section, and I would recommend that we insert one for this, and for the primary purpose of we will get leaks. I mean, the reality is that somebody's going to send queries, and if the box in the middle doesn't support .homenet, or I mean, there will certainly be boxes produced long after the specification that don't, that is a middle ground that's not going to answer that question. So they will pass it upstream. So, there's an operational consideration that pretty much says every name server on the planet should stop propagating this upward, which means
I think we say that.
It's a must.
Okay.
It's the third point, and it's a must not. And that applies to all servers unless they have been configured otherwise.
Everywhere. Okay.
Okay, Ralph, you're up.
Wes, can I just clarify? So what you're saying is we should publish an RFC saying this,
Yes.
because until we publish an RFC, the leakage will continue. And it probably will continue anyway, but at least publishing an RFC gives a mandate to software developers telling them what they should be doing.
So
Ralph.
we do need to come to a close, and I saw in the Jabber room, and Dave Thaler had mentioned it earlier, an explicit consensus of the room around TLD or not TLD. And I want to do that at some point, and I'm going to try to be very careful in how I word the question. I have a couple of ideas, but I mean, go ahead. A couple more. Whoever's in queue right now. I guess
We got Ralph and then Mark Andrews on the queue.
You okay? You okay? Ralph, is it really important?
I thought it was. I just want to be clear about something here. All of the references to the names in this document are referring to services. Is that really what we mean, or do we mean any FQDN ending with .homenet, and just services is some sort of shorthand or something?
I think it refers to
It says
any device that
devices
has a name.
and services and
Hosts and services.
hosts and services, which we borrowed from Stewart language.
Anything that has a name.
Yeah, why not just the name? Why not just every name that ends in .homenet?
Yeah, I think that's what the draft says.
Anyway, we happy to get that right, assuming we move forward.
Yeah. If Ted, sorry, Ralph, please check again, and if it looks wrong, send text, please.
Okay, I did. Yeah.
Okay, and we've got should have Mark Andrews next.
Okay. One thing that will happen with Homenet, which won't happen with .onion or .local, is because we're using the DNS, we actually have to make sure DNSSEC works. Validating clients inside the home that are going to expect that these names validate. That requires that whatever name we choose gets insecurely delegated from the parent zone, be that ARPA, dot, or anything else.
It's in the draft, Mark, and it's also going to be addressed by Ted in his talk.
Yeah, but the current slide says no leaks. Homenet DS queries will go upstream.
Yeah, there is already an instruction in the draft to create an insecure delegation from the parent.
Okay, I'm happy with that. And just make sure that when we're describing this, that don't say there will be no leaks for Homenet. Apart, you need the qualifier on there.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim and Dave,
Jane,
and I want to do some consensus calling.
Just a very quick comment. There's an NTAG VeriSign report I'm looking at here, which says .home, you get 27,000 hits per million to the DNS routes for .home, so it certainly does leak.
Boy, we should have written an RFC reserving it.
Yeah. To be fair, many of those leaks will be caused not because there is a internal resolver in the gateway which isn't stopping those queries. It's because the DHCP default network is set to that, and there's a disjoint between whether try it. You don't necessarily have a full DNS resolver that recognizes those names in your home gateway, but nonetheless your home gateway might be issuing .local or .home or whatever as the preferred DHCP search suffix. So many networks will search for .belkin or whatever, even though the device itself isn't trapping those queries.
The question I had for you, Tim, was you cited a fact, but you didn't say what conclusion you draw from that fact.
Okay, so clearly there are a number of .homes requests hitting the root. That could be simply that it's non-BT customers because the BT CPEs keep it controlled. But there is evidence of .home hitting the top.
I apologize for jumping in. So,
Oh, wait a second. Yeah, Dave was next. Stuart, make it fast.
I'll make it fast. I think it's important that when we see information like this, we dig below the surface and ask ourselves what is going on. And I've done a bit of digging, and what I believe is going on in many of these cases is you have a user at home, their home gateway is doing this novel trick where they look at the host name in the DHCP request, they append .home on the end, and now your Epson printer answers to Epson.home. And on your PC, you set up a print queue to print to Epson.home and everything is fine, and you go to Starbucks or you come to this hotel, you go to the airport and you print a print job, and it kind of sits there in the queue because trying to look at printer.home doesn't work. And as soon as you get home and open it on your laptop, the name resolves and the paper comes out, and that was what you wanted, was for this thing to sit in the print queue. Because we don't have an RFC telling Starbucks and the hotel and the airport to black hole those .home queries, they hit the root. That is one of the paths that I believe exists that causes those queries to be hitting the root. If other people have other theories about where these queries are coming from, that would be informative. But right now, I haven't heard any sane analysis of what's causing this, just continual pointing at that same document with no thought or reason or analysis going into it.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Thanks. Okay, Dave Thaler.
Okay, Dave Thaler. So
Last comment on
Mark knows why I got up if he was reading the chat room. And actually, the thing he wants to get to is one of the reasons I wanted to make sure I got up to that so that we got to that. But I'll pass on the one piece of information first, since there's not a separate presentation about the redact document, right? It's kind of, this is the only presentation that covers both of them. The feedback from Joe Hildebrand on the redact document is currently it's labeled as intended status informational, and that shouldn't happen with updating a proposed standard. That should
that must be a mistake.
In the data tracker, it's correct, but the document itself does have the wrong
right.
marking.
So I just want to make sure the working group, the intended status in the working group is proposed standard.
Absolutely.
That's necessary. Okay.
Yes.
Other than that, I just want to make sure that you could actually call the consensus so that we can minute something and call the issue closed. And so this is your chance. Handing off to you.
Thanks. What I'd like to ask is, should the working group apply for a TLD with this document at this time? Okay. So it's, of course, this is the 00 of it or the 01. We'll have to edit, wordsmith it a bit. But it's about, should we, at this time, apply for .homenet? Or a TLD, should I say. The TLD, which would likely be Homenet, I think. So I'll ask it in the positive and the negative. So the first will be, should the working group at this time with this document apply for a TLD? And then I'll say, should the working group not apply for a TLD? Okay, and then maybe figure out what the heck that means, right? Whether it's ARPA or whatever. But this is about, should the working group at this time with this document apply for a TLD? Hums if you think we should do that now. Okay, hums if you think we should not do that. I think the hums, the positive hums have it to apply for the TLD with that document now. So in terms of this room, it's closed. We'll have to take it to the list to confirm. So, thank you, everyone.
Okay. We have Ted.
Moving right along to the next agenda item.
Is the clicker over there? Is it clicker?
Hi, my name's Ted Lemon. Yes, thank you. I've been working on the Homenet architecture. There was a fair amount of pushback on the Homenet architecture the last IETF. I didn't really get a chance to have a discussion about that, but I think that we need to have a discussion about that, and so that's what this slideshow is about. Is Julius in the room?
He's remote.
Oh, good. He's on the Jabber. Great. Okay, so that's the title. So basically, I'm going to claim that we have the following options for how we can do naming on the Homenet. One option is we can just do hybrid DNS-SD and keep it simple. Another option is that we can do stateful DNS without DNSSEC. Another option is we can do stateful DNS with DNSSEC. Actually, a fourth option is that we can do some combination of these things and define things in such a way that some Homenet routers don't implement the full thing, but are capable of forwarding their queries to a router that does if you buy one. So in other words, you could build a cheaper router that just does hybrid DNS-SD, but if you buy 3 of those and one that does stateful DNS, then they'll all plug together and the right thing will happen. So that's on the new version of my slides, but I was a little late with that and Ray didn't want to confuse anything. So all right, so the options, the first option, if we do just hybrid DNS-SD, that just means that Homenet, every Homenet router has to be able to listen for MDNS and send MDNS queries on every link. Queries by hosts are sent to the local resolver using the DNS protocol, and then the hybrid DNS-SD proxy does what it does. There's a little bit of a nit with the hybrid DNS-SD model, which is that it exposes link names, and we don't have any way to meaningfully name links. So we need to not do that. But I think in practice, it's really not a big problem. It just requires a fairly simple shim. If there's a conflict, then we put a tag on each of the names that conflicts, and I think that'll all work. The advantages of hybrid DNS-SD, it's stateless, it's relatively easy. It's not trivial, but it's relatively easy. It's relatively lightweight. It's something that, I could see going into, probably going to a Linksys router, a cheap Linksys router, not an expensive Linksys router. Disadvantages, there's no support for global naming, so there's no way that names on your Homenet can be in the global DNS. It requires that every service on your Homenet support multicast, which may not work for IoT devices that are on networks that aren't capable of multicast. And of course, also it's chatty if your service is on a Wi-Fi link, and there's no security other than just link security. The next option is to do stateful DNS without DNSSEC. The advantage is we get zone transfers, we get names that are public, they're in the global DNS. So, if you want to publish something and be able to access it outside of your home network, it's possible to do that. Disadvantage, it requires setting up a delegation. That is not a trivial thing to ask an end user to do. It requires figuring out how to maintain zones. If we go with the model where all of your Homenet routers are have the capability of being primary name servers, then somehow they have to figure out which one is it. And if that one goes away, then we have to seamlessly switch to another one. So everybody has to have very up-to-date zones, and we have to have an election thing or something like that. So that's a little bit of complexity that maybe we'd rather not have. I believe that it requires a management API, which is one of the things that Julius was objecting to. And it requires that we maintain state for MDNS services, which is a little more complicated than the hybrid. The hybrid model just, it does, you ask it a question, if it doesn't have the information cached, then it just asks the question using MDNS, and so there's no state lying around. There's no need to clean up if a service goes away, because it just won't answer next time you ask. So stateful DNS with DNSSEC. The advantages are the same as, and disadvantages are the same as the previous slide, except that also you get some help with your security model, because now in principle, you have trust anchors that can be verified by hosts that are connecting to your network. And you can do a secure delegation. you can, in principle, you can do secure service publication, which means that a service can sign its updates when it announces something using DNSSD, and having signed it, it can provide a key so that if some other service tries to claim the same name, the infrastructure will defend that name. So it's a little bit harder for some device to come onto your network, notice that there's a service on the network with a certain name, and steal that name. And it also means that if you have, for example, a service that's publishing the same name on two different links, the infrastructure can tell that it's the same thing because it presents the same key. So this is a kind of a nice feature. Unfortunately, that requires that services actually implement this, which is kind of a pipe dream, and B, certainly even if they do decide to do it, is probably a long-term thing, not a short-term thing. But I still think it's worth having that facility, because there will be cases where it's worth doing. The disadvantages: it requires setting up a secure delegation. That's even harder than setting up a delegation. It requires a key management strategy that doesn't turn this into some giant pile of insecurity, and that's hard. So this is a hard problem to solve. And I've taken a stab at solving some pieces of this problem, but there's a bunch more work to do, and I haven't done it yet. So, if anybody's interested in working on this, that would be awesome. And I have ideas, so if somebody's interested, it doesn't have to be starting from zero. So just to talk a little bit about the management API, the reason why I think there's a need for a management API is that the end user is going to need it in order to set up delegations. I want us to define one, because if we don't define one, then whatever management functionality is present in any given Homenet router is going to be specific to that router, and it's not going to work. If you buy a router from Linksys and you buy another router from, what's another brand name? TP-Link. Sorry. So if you buy two routers from two different vendors, chances are they aren't going to work together. You're going to have a separate app to talk to each one. It's going to be really clunky and unfriendly, and that's not what we want, I think. I think it's probably going to be a simple HTTP-based, well, HTTPS preferably based API. And it should be possible to make it work with web UIs. And in principle, that could help us to solve the sort of key management problem by storing the keys on some device other than the Homenet router, so they're not just lying around for somebody to grab. And in fact, in the case of the KSK, you could actually have it never appear on the Homenet router. The ZSK probably does have to be on the Homenet router. And just an aside here, well,
I have a question about the management stuff.
Yeah.
Is this your wish list of
This is my laundry list.
This is your laundry list of things that would make the Homenet better.
Yeah.
It's not naming architecture per se.
Right. The only reason I mention it here is because I think that the naming architecture, if we elect to do either of the two more difficult naming architecture things, and we choose not to do a management API, we're going to regret it. So I think it's worth mentioning. I think that we should factor it into the decision-making process, because my goal at the end of this is to try to figure out what we should do, and we need to be informed before we make that decision. So it's worth understanding that yes, there is some weight that comes with doing stateful DNS, whether it's with DNSSEC or without. There's more weight if it's with, but there's weight in either case, and we need to be aware of that.
Now, I could imagine, you mentioned HTTP here, but I could imagine somebody would want a netconf management API. Somebody, there's probably a list there.
So that I think would be solving a different problem. So the API that I'm talking about is something that app writers can talk to, and making them learn netconf is.
I bet it's going to come up if we decide to do it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it'll come up. But and by the way, I think we should do a netconf API, but I think that's a different thing.
Okay.
And in fact, probably wouldn't provide some of the functionality that we're talking about here. So anyway, delegation. So it's possible that we could do this automatically without the user intervening in any way. If the ISP is the one that provides the name, they could just provide, like, customer 123.isp.com and problem solved. But we still need to be able to allow the end user to override that. You know, like on my Homenet, I don't want my ISP's domain name on my Homenet. I want my domain on my Homenet. Some people might also want a name that's stable, like if they're multi-homed or if they're not sure they're going to stay with an ISP, they might want to pick a name that doesn't change over time. So there's an opportunity here for provider. How are we doing for time?
We've got about 5 to 10 minutes.
We've got 15 minutes to the end of the session.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't realize we were that short. Okay, so yeah, so examples. It could so basically the idea is that could be a pretty lightweight, cheap thing. Secure delegation requires that we actually send information up to the ISP or to the delegation provider. It could be done with DHCP PD. It could be an API like I just talked about. It could be done by an app. In fact, I actually think that's probably the best way to do it. So the question for the working group, which I wanted to ask, is what do we want? Do we actually, because I wrote the Homenet architecture thinking, Homenet is trying to solve a really interesting problem, and it's trying to solve it right. And if we really want to solve it right, we should actually deploy the same protocols on the Homenet that we're deploying elsewhere on the internet, and that includes DNSSEC. So I want full DNSSEC, but I have no idea whether the working group wants full DNSSEC, and if they don't, then I'm kind of wasting my time writing documents about it. The question, why go to all of this trouble to do DNSSEC or whatever, my personal feeling is, the demand for security in the home is likely to increase given current events, and I would like us to be ready for that. So that's my motivation. Your motivation may vary. I just submitted, I actually wrote the requirements doc before the slide deck, but then I didn't actually upload it until just now. The requirements doc basically just lists what I think the things are that we might want to try to do, what's going to be required to do them, and what the implications of that are. It's very, very sketchy right now. It's about 5 paragraphs. It needs to be a little more detailed. I don't know if we actually, my intention with this is not to publish an RFC. It's just to have a place where we can, people can put in their comments and we can collect the information and have a reasonable discussion about it, because I don't want to just, it's great to do a hum here, but what I really want is to have a document that in which we can express the things we could do, and then what the pros and cons of those things are, and then actually make a decision based on that. So I would love it if folks would participate, and I'm curious if anybody has any comments.
Hi, Ted. Stuart Cheshire again. I had one comment on one of your earlier slides about the hybrid proxy approach, where you said it doesn't work with global DNS, and I think that's a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
Assumption.
Yeah, we actually talked about that 1 or 2 IETFs. I think it was in Buenos Aires, and you're right. You could send queries over the DNS protocol and have them be resolved on the Homenet. I agree that that's true in principle. However, it's such an amazingly powerful DOS attack that I don't think we want to offer that functionality.
Oh, okay. So I think I understand your concern now. It's not that it doesn't work with global names. It's that the idea of bringing queries into the house.
Yeah, ideally, if we set up zones, we can do zone transfers. We can actually have the house can be a hidden primary, and the actual primary that gets the queries could be some actual big server that's capable of answering them.
Well, that's the much earlier documents we have from Daniel Migo.
Yeah, Daniel Migo's documents
addresses that.
Exactly.
Okay, so that answers that question. My overall comment, which I think is that this sounds very ambitious.
Yes, I agree.
And some of the things you're talking about require the ISPs to offer some service that creates.
They don't require it. Well, they require that service to be available, but they don't require that an ISP offer that service.
Okay, you're requiring that somebody provides a service whereby end users can get domains registered without having to go to GoDaddy and
we don't require that. It would be nice if that were available. And frankly, GoDaddy could probably make some money doing that. It's very simple. It would be very easy to set up. You could charge $5 a year.
Okay. I think they already do have a service where you can register domains and pay them every year.
Yes. Yeah. Well, right. You could just register a TLD, and in fact, one way to solve this problem is just register a TLD. It's just that it would burn through a lot of not TLDs.
You don't mean
sorry,
TLD, just a domain of your own.
but TLDs on the brain. Yeah. No. So you could just register a domain name, but personally, I think that's overkill. I think it would be nice to provide a lighter weight option so that we don't have the AOL syndrome.
A service provider could have a domain of their own and sell subdomains without having to pay a third-party registration fees for that.
Yeah.
Hi, Bob Hinden. Well, first, my bad attitude comment is that so this is clearly a new business model for ICANN home TLDs.
Yeah.
So, two serious comments. So, I think this has for this to have any hope. I don't know what exactly the right solution is, but any notion that users have to do anything complicated, probably, and I'm not even sure I know how to do this. It's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not even close.
Yeah.
So it's got to be simple. It probably needs to be automatic. I don't want to be trying to get services like this from an ISP or something. Or I mean, the regular home user isn't going to know how to do that. It's
right.
just, I think it's going to have to be a lot simpler. I'm not. Well, I understand the value of DNSSEC. I'm not sure it actually helps home users very much. It's certainly
Mm-hmm.
good for public services and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think bringing it here, at least I don't see a lot of value in it. But whatever we do here, it's got to be usable by a home user who doesn't know anything.
Yep.
That most are going to be plugging some stuff together, and it's got to work.
Yep.
And if it's beyond that, there's no point doing any of this. I think.
Yep.
Okay, Michael, and after Michael, we got Mark on Mute Echo.
Michael Richardson. So you asked, do I want any of this stuff, and do I care about DNSSEC? And I guess the answer is that as long as the zone is not really going to be queried by anybody outside of the home, then I think the DNSSEC has more hassle than it's worth. So if it's not going to be queried by anybody outside the home, then I'm not sure it's worth having any of it. Right?
Yep.
So that's my thought process, is that there. So if we're going to do it, then we probably ought to do it well. I agree with Bob Hinden that this could be really complicated and difficult to set up, but I think it also could be really easily automated. And I think the only reason why we don't see out there people shouting for this is that most people have no idea that it's even possible, right? Just the people in this room at the IETF, yeah, we think that we've all done this. It's maybe a pain in the ass for some of us, but we've been doing it a long time, and our friends our Muggle friends don't know what we're doing, and we'd like them to do that, right? And so I think that this is valuable, but I also think that this is not critical path for Homenet,
right?
That we need to accommodate this work, but not depend upon it.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Michael. And I also, I don't think it's actually interesting to do this work if it's not easy to use. Like, what's the point?
I'm thinking, to that point, do we need a threat analysis document? Is there anyone? Well, good, volunteer to write it.
You stuck your thumb up at the wrong moment.
That might, a well-written, well-researched threat analysis of what are the top things that we're trying to avoid happening, and then we could weigh the solutions against that. There is also a point of, the attack that will come, but we also have plenty that are happening right now. We could consider. Anyway, we've got like 2 minutes.
Yeah,
so.
we're running. Harold, we got
Wait,
Mark. We have Mark Andrews on Mute Echo first, and we only have a few minutes.
So
Keep it
1
nice
minute
brief. Yeah, a minute each, and then we've got to decide what to do with this document next. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah.
Had all this time.
Mark is next.
Mark is next. Mute Echo.
Yeah. Having a home gateway push out a zone is trivial to do, including updating a name server. This stuff isn't hard to do. We just need to define the protocol for it to do, for the other end to accept
I hear a
the
volunteer.
updates. It is basically pass out a new IP address. We have names. We have home gateways today which update the DNS using update and TSIG whenever they reconnect. This is trivial stuff. It's trivial protocol stuff. It isn't hard to make something do this, so that the only thing the user has to put in is the name, their zone name that they've got registered somewhere, and where they're sending the update to, along with a password, username password pair, which is what they translate TSIG to in the user interface. So this isn't anything that is really difficult.
I would be interested in talking to you about maybe seeing if you're interested in writing a document.
And all this, John. Just protesting the idea that that my HomeNet is not full of enemies. It's full of enemies, including all my friends' iPhones and my toaster.
Yeah.
David Skenazy. I'm just want to make a point on this, and really taking it from the perspective of a user, as someone who's configured routers for friends and family for a long time. The moment you ask a user to go in and configure something, you failed. You have lost. What I like about that bonjour thing is that they don't need to do anything. They click the printer button on their computer and they can print stuff. It's great. Problem is, if your house is a little bit bigger and you have 2 routers, today you've lost, because now one side of the house can't see the other house.
Right.
This is why I like HomeNet. You can't plug it in wrong. It's beautiful. I love it. And so from a user's perspective, what they want is, now you plug this shit in. That's all you need to do. There is no step 3.
Right.
You can see the devices on the other side.
Yeah.
From a user's perspective, if it automatically updates to a DNS, does a zones transfer somewhere, most users don't want that. That would be a privacy leak of the devices that are in there.
Yeah.
So I'm saying there is value in doing that. I'm not saying otherwise for power users, but for the great majority of human beings that will never go in the UI, this won't happen.
Right.
So maybe in terms of priority, that the thing that really matters most right now is doing the hybrid proxy and DNSSD approach that would get us there.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Right. James, and then cut the line at this.
Oh, lucky me. Hi, I'm James Woodyan. And when I saw the slide in this presentation you gave that talked about the need for a management API and your explanation for why you thought that was important, I immediately began to think, wow, so if we had a management API, that would make it so that I could expect that there would be an app that spoke this standard protocol that talks to whatever the router is that implements HomeNet protocols, and then that would allow me to manage the contents of my DNS zone. So I thought to myself, okay, who's going to implement that, and where is it going to be, how is that actually going to be made available to users? And correct me if I'm wrong, but my expectation was, well, obviously that would be operating system vendors, right? They would provide it as part of their, well, you know, how do I get this app, right? Does it come with my router?
It's an iPhone app or an Android app. I mean, well, most people won't know and they won't need to install it. This is to your point. Most people don't need this functionality. I just want it. I want us to design this functionality in because A, some people already want this functionality, and B, I think the number of people that will need this functionality is going to increase over time.
I know, and what I would like to point out is that I think I agree with Stuart Cheshire and others who have said that one of the things about this proposal that makes it seem really ambitious is the chicken and egg problem associated with who is going to implement which parts of this. Where are the incentives to make it so that the app that has the human interface for managing this stuff is matched up. I mean, that gets deployed, and then the people who make routers are going to implement this protocol too.
Yeah.
And I just don't see how there's any incentive for all of that to be standardized.
I think that
group.
the way that this stuff would leak out into the world is through the open source community, not through some vendor, because I think that the people who will want this early on are going to be early adopters. But I think that the functionality is sufficiently valuable that at some point I may be totally wrong about this, but at some point I think that you'll start to see sort of the more savvy geeks or the more savvy network users who aren't really geeks start to install it, and then at some point our mom or actually my mom's pretty smart, but
all right, now that we're talking about our mothers, it's the end of the meeting. We've got it's exactly no lines are cut.
Closed.
We're done. Thank you very much. Ray wants to say something.
Well, we have to decide now what the next step is on this document, because we have a document that's still an individual draft.
Well,
we've had some feelings that it was too ambitious.
Yeah, I basically part of what's been going on for me going through this process is just like trying to scope what we could do when. And I think what I would like to do is start off with a design that allows us to do whatever is available, which so I think the MDN SSD hybrid proxy thing, if we set it up right, will allow us to add an authoritative server if we want to.
So can I suggest that we try a new individual cut of the document, which starts at the baseline, but where you're at least allowing for, even if you're not documenting, future expansion into a DNS sec-signed full distribution.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I think that's exactly the right.
We have a next step. I don't know who's still paying attention, but if we can have a hum in.
Well, I don't think
actually no, don't need a hum.
We've lost half.
I think the consensus of the people who actually stood up was that that's the right thing to do. So that's what I proposed.
Let's do it on that basis, and hopefully, if we can possibly, Ted, have that well before the next IETF, so that we can
I'll
have a document.
I'll take a hatchet to the current document and see what I can do,
and then have something we can actually call for adoption as a working group document before the next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and may your home networks be secure and easy to use.
So, regarding the insecure application,